So the last thing I want to talk about today is I really want to talk about ethics, because I think now that we've sort of looked at all the options and things we could do within these, what's the right thing to do, or what's a way to think about like what the right and wrong way to approach some of these tools are? As you've probably seen, if you're anywhere on the internet, Reddit, Twitter, wherever, you'll see that there's a lot of the anti-text to image. There's a big backlash against text to image tools, right? And there are people that are saying like, oh, you're just stealing other people's artwork and using it for your own purposes, right? These models are collage tools. All they do is cut and paste things and put them back together. I have often described these tools as collaging, but I've never meant it literally. I've never meant like it takes a Kandinsky, cuts out a section and pastes it back into the image, right? I think these as conceptual collage tools. They are, as we saw with that image where we're combining Tri-X and Kandinsky and changing the weight of the Kandinsky, what you get out of it is not a Kandinsky in the end, or not a photograph, but you get a mix of the two. And that is sort of what I think is the power of these tools. But because of the hype cycle of these things, you've got people saying like, oh, you're stealing. And you've got other people saying like, this will change everything about art forever and ever. And like, it's just kind of annoying because we're in this hype cycle where like people just love picking a side and then really indexing on that side. So for example, you may have seen this guy. I think he's like a CEO tech bro kind of dude. He posted this thing that like, there's no doubt that using these tools is making like real art. I spent an hour and a half tweaking these things to produce these visuals. So I guess he's assuming real art is totally about how much time you spend on things, instead of, I don't know, some other concept or other way to approach art. Kind of annoying, right? Like, and he posted this thing like, there's a real soul to these images that I can't get from other things, which of course just pissed off artists like you wouldn't believe. So he wrote this thing, and he also posted an image of what his text prompt was. And of course, immediately someone said this and say like, hey, you added by Greg Rutkowski in here. So clearly you're just stealing from that guy, right? Like clearly what you're doing here is just stealing from other artists, and the images being output are based on what you're stealing from. And it's just like, here's how I feel about this. Here's the thing, they're both wrong. They're both like, these are both incorrect assumptions about what these tools do. Yes, the tech bro used Greg Rutkowski's name and made it sound like he was sort of solving art. He is now like, use this tool and now he's an artist and he demands respect as an artist. But the reply also said like, well, hey, like you're stealing from that artist. But again, if you go to Have I Been Trained On and you look up Greg Rutkowski's art, you will see in there that there are no portraits. There are no portraits in his artwork. So when someone says, oh, you're just stealing the person's art, it's kind of not, it's not true. There are some photos of people, but there's certainly no portrait that looks like this, right? And again, this is where we get into this world of like, he's got 30 different text prompt tags in here. What are they contributing to this image? Probably lots of little nuances here and there. Also, he uploaded another image to get this image out of it. So it's like, we'll talk about that more next week, but like, there's a bunch of stuff that is like very confusing or maybe ethically, like morally ambiguous about like, wait, what did he actually do to produce this image? Besides spend an hour and a half changing text prompts, right? And I think this is the problem with this hype cycle is you've got people who say like, this changes everything. All old artists are now obsolete and the AI art is taking over everything. And you've got other people that are like, this is purely theft. And anyone that's an AI artist is an evil person and deserves to be executed or whatever. And the reality is it's somewhere in the middle. Like neither of these sides are right. And being asked to pick a side and somehow fight for that side is kind of bullshit. So what I want to talk to you about is just like, here's how I think about these ethically. Here's how I approach these tools and how I work through them. And I've got some examples that I'll show you, just like my sort of framework for this stuff. And Emily is here, and Emily has written some other guides on the ethics of data set creation and other things. So we have some other experts here, other people that can weigh in and how they might approach this. And, first I'll say I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I don't think we've really seen any lawsuits happen with this stuff yet. I'm sure it's close to happening because I saw someone make a Disney data set. And it's like, you touch Disney, the Disney lawyers are going to come out in full force. So I think maybe we'll eventually get a lawsuit that actually tells us what some answers are here. But I approach this sort of like, okay, think before you type. What am I trying to do? How should I think about that? And other things there. This is my personal approach. I kind of take I would say a centrist approach. There are other people who are probably more conservative and probably other people who are more liberal in how they approach these things. So my first thing is I think context matters a lot. Here in the US, we actually have laws that have said parody is a legal form of what might be considered copyright infringement. But if you are parodying or criticizing the thing you are using, you often have more legal leeway. Whether a Disney lawyer, and there are millions and millions of lawyers, could change that, I'm not sure. But I do think context matters, right? Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, style transfer was like the big ML tool. And all these apps came out where you could take a selfie of your face and you could apply the Starry Night texture to your face. And it's sort of like, what's special about Starry Night besides the fact that everyone knows what the image looks like, right? So context matters. What are you using these styles for? Is it purely just for, hey, I want to adopt a cool style and I want to make my thing look like that? Or are you using styles as a way to actually say something about your work? So again, I'll show you some of my work. I'm not saying my work is the best thing imaginable, but I am saying like, I approached it with this in mind. So I think I showed this project in week 1. This is a number of horror film scenes that have then had the Scream texture or the Scream, Edvard Munch's The Scream applied to it. And for me, like, this is where context matters, right? If I were to apply, I don't know, Greg Rutkowski's work to this, it wouldn't have the same sort of contextual importance that it does, right? What I'm trying to say here is like Edvard Munch's The Scream, which is from the 19th century, could be connected all the way up to the film that we make today, where we have these like, really like close crop scream scenes, right? And that's sort of what I'm trying to do here. Other people approach concept art as a different way, but for me, this is a way to contextualize why I'm choosing the certain styles I'm choosing. Next idea is punching up versus punching down. I don't know how many people are familiar with this concept, but this is sort of like comedy, right? So in comedy circles, there's this idea of punching up, which would be like making fun of politicians, making fun of celebrities, making fun of people who are like famous and like, in many ways are, the most powerful people in the world, versus punching down, which would be more like picking on trans people or picking on Black people or other folks who like are in a much less privileged situation. So if we apply this to art, it's sort of like, am I picking a style from like an artist who, is still grinding out day to day, like trying to make a living and just has a Patreon page? And I've gone ahead and just picked their style up and now I'm applying that to all my work. And now it's my style, or like the way I approach is my style. Compared to like, say, using Picasso or I don't know, Jeff Koons, someone who's like a very famous artist today. And like, again, it's back to that context thing of like, if I want to make fun of Jeff Koons and his artwork, like I might use a Jeff Koons sort of prompt and see what I get out of that. So I think it's a little bit of, again, thinking about like, where do I sit in this context? Like when I was explaining this earlier to my ITP class, right? If you can afford to go to NYU and you can afford to go to ITP, you have a certain level of privilege and you should recognize that and acknowledge that, stealing from an artist who is maybe, just trying to get their feet on the ground and trying to make a living might not be the way to approach it. You might want to think about who you're taking from. I don't know anything about how much money Greg Rutkowski makes, but I know everyone uses his phrase. I know he's also very upset about it. So again, it's like, maybe if an artist has said like, hey, I prefer you to not use my prompts in your phrase, we should respect that. My next thing, which is just a general rule for me, this applies to also like books and other things, is dead artists are fair game, living artists are more of a question mark, right? Again, a living artist is probably trying to make a living. If they're really famous, maybe they're already making a lot of money, but most living artists are, scraping by or barely making a wage. Dead artists, like a Picasso or whatever, like, I don't really care. Like their family is probably doing fine. Wherever their foundation is, they're probably doing fine. So, my approach is I'll gladly steal from a dead artist because they've already made their money's worth. With one exception, if they literally just died this week, do not use their like artwork and do not post that. Someone literally did this very recently, where like a manga artist or someone died, and like that hour, somebody's on there making AI art that's like, look at this cool AI art made of this artist, and people are just like, what the fuck? What are you thinking? Like, people are hurting. Don't do this. So again, my rule of thumb is be smart about this shit. Like, don't just go ahead and say like, oh, this person just died. Time for me to cash in and make a bunch of AI art. Please don't do that. Like, silly. I don't think anyone here would do that, but like that's like a common thing for me to think through. My next sort of prompt is like, I have a cascade of how I would approach something like picking from an artist, right? So as we saw, there's lots of styles, right? Concept art, fantasy illustration, abstract expressionism, Bauhaus, modernism, whatever. I sort of would be like, let me start with a style and see if that gets me to where I want to be. If that works, then that's cool. It's kind of like probably a bunch of artists operate in that style. From there, cascade down, like let's say, I don't know, modernism is too broad. Let me maybe pick a couple modernist artists that I would want to, sample from. Not just one, but like a couple. Like, maybe, I don't know, Moholy-Nagy and Kandinsky and a couple other people that are maybe Bauhaus guys that maybe like Paul Klee. Maybe those guys have like a similar style that I want to sort of get to. And I would use those 3 or 4 phrases together. I think again, styles is like the least concerning because you're sort of saying like, give me just like what a bunch of people make. Multiple artists would be like the next round where you're kind of getting that to that conceptual collage. What is the similarity between Paul Klee, Kandinsky, and Moholy-Nagy, right? Like what is sort of in the middle there that like kind of gives me something interesting? And lastly, I would say like, yes, you can use a single artist, but be careful about that because more than likely you're going to get a lot of effect from their one image, right? So if I were to say like For a Scene by Greg Rutkowski, that is going to get really close to what his work actually is. And you kind of, I would say personally, I want to avoid that, right? Like I should be trying to make something new that isn't just like, hey, this model can generate multiple Rutkowskis. That's cool. Like that's kind of, as an artist, I would feel like that's not really mine. That's like Greg's, or like that's somehow like a variation on Greg's work. And I want to make work that's mine. So this is how I would approach it, is just like, as you cascade down, you can kind of get a different sense of that. So here's another project that I did. This uses a number of artists who are from what's called the Transcendental Art Movement. So a bunch of people in the Southwest of the US. So I think like there's one called Agnes Patton. There's a couple other people. If you Google it, you'll sort of see some artists there. I used a bunch of their artists, like a bunch of their names in this process to generate sort of a collage. They all have a similar style, but even within that style, there's some changes. So I utilize that as a way to sort of get to that look and feel for all of them without saying like, I'm only using Agnes Patton or I'm only using like this particular artist. And for me, this kind of feels like, again, maybe getting closer and closer to maybe ethically like questionable, but because it used 5 or 6 different artists, I felt like it was in a range where it had a style and a look without getting too close to any one of those artists. So you get these nice, beautiful colors that I sort of like love. That's sort of like one of the things I really enjoy about their particular art movement. But they also have some people that are doing more abstract work and some people that are doing more figurative work. And you get sort of a different mix of these things. So again, for me, this was like still within like fair range. I also thought one of the funny things that happens with this is because you say by so-and-so, comma, by so-and-so, comma, by so-and-so, the model actually thinks you want like a grid of images, right? This is actually like what it's probably seen maybe collaged or like grouped images from like an art house or an art gallery, where it's like, this one's by this person, this one's by this person, this one's by this person. So you actually get this kind of beautiful grid. So somebody I think previously had asked me like, how did you make this grid? And it just kind of came naturally from using a text prompt that was by so-and-so, comma, by so-and-so, comma, by so-and-so. So you kind of get these interesting sort of effects when you also play with these things. So this is just, again, my approach. Someone else might look at this and be like, whoa, way too close to transcendentalism of like Southwest, like not for me, or like too close, too on the nose. And that's kind of what's fun about this, is everyone can sort of define their own range. Okay, so last thing I'll say is I've sort of touched on this earlier, be aware of your privilege. A lot of us are white on here. I would probably avoid using famous Black artists, right? Who might have a certain style or a certain context for their work, right? If they're African-American, it might be that they're, painting images of being a slave or being poor or growing up during Reconstruction. And if you just go ahead and grab their name and drop it in your image, you might be, again, sort of context matters, right? You might be grabbing something for a stylistic purpose, and instead you're grabbing something that is now about context. So again, it's really important to like, I think one of the things that I hear is sort of funny about these things is people who are not really into art before they get into these tools are like, man, I got to learn all this stuff about artists. I have to learn this artist and this artist and this artist. It's kind of cool. Like, I like that. I like that people have to learn about art history in order to use these tools. But sometimes they're just like, I like the look of that thing, and they don't research like, oh, what was the art about? Oh, it's about slavery. Oh, maybe I should have rethought that, right? So most of us are probably artists here. Most of us have had some art history background. But again, thinking about like, oh, if I'm using this particular artist, did it turn out they were really into the Nazis, or like, were they a Nazi in 1945? Maybe I should avoid using them if I'm talking about this pure topic, right? So again, you kind of have to go in and do your research. What does this artist mean? What was this movement, right? So if you're going to go in and do futurism, you might want to learn that a lot of futurists became fascists in Italy, right? So like, all this sort of stuff, it matters, because when you start exposing your art to other people, they say like, whoa, you're using fascist work in your art. Like, are you a fascist? And you're like, oh God, I don't think so. Like, what happened here, right? So again, because we're sampling from other places, we need to know what those samples mean to different people. And that, I think, is really important to remember as we utilize this work. And lastly, I'll just say, like, I think a really key thing here is don't be a jerk. There are so many people that use these tools that quite honestly, come from a tech background, and their post is like, this is going to obsolete all art, and now I'm the artist, or like whatever, or like, this is going to put filmmakers out of business because I can make a film in an hour using these tools. And it's kind of like, dude, one, no, you can't. This film is a piece of shit. Two, like, it's worth acknowledging that there is a debt to this work, right? Because they have taken from all across the internet. We've included a lot of artists in their work in these pieces. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this could not happen in a vacuum. If there were no art ever in existence on the internet, this model could never exist. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, like, I am using these tools, trying to find my own artistic merit, acknowledging there's a bunch of artistic debt being paid when using these tools. And lastly, I'll say, I think it's important, like, there's been a lot of infighting within this community about whether it's okay to keep your prompt to yourself. I don't really want to get into the world of like, I keep my prompts for me and I never share them. People can do what they want to do, but I think it's actually very helpful in the context of ethics about sharing your prompts, so people can see like, oh, you use Greg Rutkowski in this. Well, what actually did that contribute to? Or, oh, you use this other artist. Well, let me go on Have I Been Trained and type in that artist's name. How close is this to the actual output of the image? Because I think there is this idea from many traditional artists that these models collage things and they just steal things and paste them into a new shape. And I think it's actually important that if you say like, hey, here's the prompt I used, go look up this artist on Have I Been Trained, and you'll see these are not exactly the same thing. I think that's important to highlight. And I would imagine like publishing your prompts is actually a good way to counteract sort of that assumption that you are stealing from people. Other people are like, I don't want to share my prompt because then someone can make my image and then they're stealing from me. And it's sort of like, wow, we're like stealing from now. We're like in like this weird cascade of like what theft is. And those people can keep that feeling. But from my perspective, it's like sharing the prompt I used will help other people sort of see like, oh, there's a cool style here, but like it's really overpowering and too close to the original. How can I tweak it? Is it weighting? Is it adding a different like text prompt included in there? That sort of thing. So I sort of think like one way to be ethical about this is to be a little bit more open about it, right? And we all sort of have like said like, we love open source tools, and then to be like, we love open source tools, but I won't open source my process. It's sort of like, interesting. You like benefiting from open source, but you don't want to share your own process. And again, those people can do what they want to do. My own framework says I will share. If you'll ask like, hey, what prompt did you use? And if I remember it, I'll be like, oh, here's what I used. Or I'll be like, I think I used something like this. Or like, here's an artist name I reference, that sort of thing. So this is just sort of my framework. I think for me, it's at least allowed me to have conversations with people who are like, did you just steal this? And it's like, no, well, look at this image and then look at what their artwork is, right? Like compare those. Yes, you can see stylistic similarities, but it's not one-to-one. Or like, here's how I'm combining ideas. So for me, it's like, I want, here's my main framework. If I were to say like, I'm using Greg Rutkowski's work, I wouldn't want Greg Rutkowski to see my image and be like, you just stole that from me, right? Like I'd want someone to say like, oh, that's interesting that you use my style, but it doesn't look like my kind of thing. Like, that's more of like oh, I understand you're not just ripping me off. Like there is something else going on here, and we could have a conversation about like what that difference is. Or they're like, ooh, that looks really close to my thing. It's just a little different, but it's still really close. Like, that makes me feel weird. And I'd be like, oh, okay, let's have a conversation about that, you know? So my journal framework is if an artist actually saw me using their prompts, would they feel weird or like put off by my work? And I think this sort of all helps me explain to someone that they like wanted to come up and fight me, how I would like defend myself, you know, without resorting to fists or whatever. So this is my framework. I'm definitely open to hearing from other people what they think would work well or not. But so far, this has at least helped me feel good about the work that I'm producing.